Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this marvellous day which you have created. Even though it's a bit windy out there, we pray that as we're gathered here to conduct your business, you grant the councillors knowledge, wisdom and understanding, and may they have patience with one another and listen and respect each other. We ask this in your name and to your glory, that your business which they are conducting will be to the glory of your name and for the common good. Amen.
Amen.
Shall we just say the Lord's Prayer together? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Please be seated. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, councillors. Are there any official apologies for absence? None? Declarations of interest? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a disclosable pecuniary interest due to my employment, and it is in relation to the facility at the Phoenix Centre for Service Users with a Learning Disability. This is in the Cabinet Secretary's Resilient Community Report, agenda item 4. If there's any questions or debate, I will of course leave the room. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Benson. Councillor Hobson?
Yeah, I'm told I have a personal interest in agenda item 5, as I am the chair of the Board of Directors of the Blackpool Housing Company.
Thank you, Councillor. Oh, I'm so sorry. Councillor Robertson?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I have an interest in the Blackpool Housing Company as I am a director on the board.
Thank you. Is that all? Thank you. Minutes of the meeting. No, you've got one more, have you? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I was rather slow off the mark there.
Councillor
Yes,
Hunter, I've yet to wake up.
Yeah, I would also like to declare personal interest being a director of Blackpool Housing Company.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Singleton?
And again, Mr Mayor, I'm also a director of Blackpool Housing Company. Thank you.
Are there any more? Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on November 18th, pages 1 to 6. Are we agreed? Thank you, Councillor.
On page 2, under the executive reports, and note 1, Councillor Campbell agreed to send a written response to Councillor Mrs Scott on the number of council-owned properties with cavity wall insulation that was unsuitable for coastal properties and the number of complaints that had been received from tenants. On the record and in the recording, Councillor Mrs Scott actually asked how many complaints had the council received regarding cavity wall installation failures from private homes who'd had grants. Not tenants, private homes that had grants to have the work done. Just like to clarify that, Mr Mayor.
Are we in order?
Mr Mayor, if that's a clarification on the minutes, and members are happy to accept that, we can make the relevant adjustments in the signed copy. Yeah.
Thank you. Members happy? Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I have no announcements to make today other than what is already in the agenda. We now have a resolution of condolence to Freedom of to Freeman of the Borough of Blackpool, Mr. Jimmy Armfield, CBE. Thank you. I believe you all have a copy. And we shall, first of all, have 1 minute silence if everyone could be upstanding, please. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. Thank you. Councillor Blackman, I believe. Sorry. Oh, I beg your pardon. Councillor Jackson, would you like to move the resolution?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, fellow councillors, I consider it an honour and a privilege to move the resolution of condolence for the Freeman of the Borough, Mr Jimmy Armfield, CBE. On April the 9th, 2003, when Jimmy received the honour of becoming a Freeman of the Borough, I was privileged also on that occasion to move that recommendation. And over the last 9 days, many words have been spoken about Jimmy and many memories shared. He was indeed a man who touched the hearts of many people. Through his contribution to sport, his devotion to Blackpool FC, he was a one-club player, his skills as a football manager and a commentator. I started watching Blackpool myself in 1953 as a young lad of 15. You know how old I am now. And Jimmy, of course, wasn't playing in those days. We only had players who turned up on the field that day who were picked. The 11 players, there was no such thing as substitutes. And Jimmy was an unknown character to most of us, I think. And then in 1954, Jimmy made his first 2 appearances that season for the club. And it didn't dawn on me at the time why it was only 2 matches, but of course Jimmy was doing his national service. And then in 1956 I started my national service and missed the 2 years when Jimmy came to the fore and his skills were appreciated by the Blackpool fans in a tremendous way. He was loved throughout our town, and he gave freely of his time to serve the town in so many ways. He was rewarded and honoured with an OBE and a CBE, and many of us believed he was worthy of a knighthood, and would have loved to have seen that. I would have loved to have seen that happen, and I'm sure many people would have done. Jimmy had a knack of making people feel it important and to feel at ease. You became his friend, and many thousands of people here in Blackpool would regard Jimmy as their friend, and he would equally regard them as his friend. He was always keen to listen, always keen to engage, always keen to understand other people and sharing their concerns. So to Anne, to John and to Duncan and the Armfield family, on behalf of the council, we offer our love and our sympathy at this sad time, and our thoughts and our prayers are with them. Jimmy had a strong Christian faith, that influenced his way of life and made him the iconic gentleman that he was. I was thinking about this, and I ought to know as a local preacher, but if there is a Premier League in heaven, Jimmy will definitely be in it. So we send our condolences. I ask you to approve the resolution. The resolution there contains lots of details about Jimmy, which I'm sure many of us are well aware of, but it is a very short but a very well felt resolution of appreciation to a man who was loved and deserved that love. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Owen.
I'll press it green button. I hate doing it, but there we go. In considering the motion before us, Mr. Mayor, we're all acknowledging in our own way Jimmy Armfield's celebrity and the great work he did on our behalf as an ambassador of the town, as our Freeman. But more than that, we are expressing our sympathy and fellow feeling for Mrs. Armfield, the boys and the family. Mr. Mayor, we all need heroes. I can recall being at Leighton Primary School and being awarded a certificate, a cycling proficiency certificate. And it was with some awe and trepidation that I filed it with others in the lecture hall at Central Library. And it was Harry Johnston who presented us with the certificate. Harry Johnston, Blackpool centre half and captain. And the fact that I remember it now means that it made a big impression on me. And I suppose with Jimmy, he always lived in the town. It can recall in some ways how Harry Johnson too, he had a paper shop, if we remember, on Central Drive opposite Reeds Avenue. And you could go in that shop and buy your sweets and your newspaper, and it would be Harry who would serve you with the goods. And I think it's that sort of background that Jimmy Armfield was probably the very last footballer who became an adopted son of the town he played for. A right back. I can remember playing right back at Baines with the T-ball, that leather ball, and on a wet soggy day on Field B between Hardhorn Road and High Cross Road, if you could kick it 30 yards, you'd be doing very well. And I think we all used to marvel when Farm and Armfield, when he did take up his position in the 55-56 season, as Blackpool's solid right back. And it was in that season, of course, that Blackpool came runners-up to Manchester United in the First Division. I don't think we've ever been as high as that again. And Jimmy Armfield was there throughout that season. But if we think of Jimmy now, we think of loyalty, loyalty to his roots, loyalty to his club, loyalty to Blackpool. We think of a man who was the epitome of decency. No matter what organisation he was involved in, everybody could speak highly of knowing Jimmy. And knowing might be the odd conversation, we all felt we knew him. I remember at a function at the start of the Fun and Games at Bloomfield Road, and as we're saying, is there any way we can broker some kind of deal? And he smiled a little and he said, nothing is forever, only the divine. And I thought it was quite a telling remark, meaning that nothing stands still. There is always progress. For all of us, heroes are important. People we can respect. People we can learn from. People who have got something to contribute, no matter what their age. And I think for so many people outside Blackpool, it wasn't Blackpool as a footballer that he was remembered for. He was a bit of a beacon on Radio 5. His commentaries, his summing up over many years in that lovely Manchester, still had a soft Manchester voice of him. And that's how most people knew Jimmy Armfield. And the paeans of praise, the enormous pleasure that he gave to so many people throughout the country, has been well chronicled in the national press in this last week or two. I don't know who Shakespeare was thinking of among his contemporaries when he wrote the last few lines of Julius Caesar. And it was in Mark Antony's words after Brutus's death. His life I'm forgetting my lines, aren't I? The elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up against the world and say, this was a man. Jimmy Armfield, Mr. Mayor, was Blackpool's Brutus.
Well said, sir. Thank you. Councillor Mrs Anderson, MBE, is to speak on behalf of the Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, Mr Mayor, I'm not going to mention about his football prowess. I'm not going to mention what you've all been sorry about all these last 13 days. It's been horrendous. I'm going to tell you about when I first met him and we became personal friends just after he'd finished his national service. I'm not going to talk about only him as a friend, but Anne. And I met James, believe it or not, in St. Peter's Church. He'd just come and he came up to introduce himself to me. And he welcomed me, and I'd been in Blackpool a few years then. We'd come to live there, and gave me his name, and I said, oh, I can't call you that. You'll have to be James. So we have been friends ever since that day. I have never once called him what you all call him. To me, I looked at him and I thought, he looks like a James, he's going to be a James. He said, that's two of you who know my real name. I think the other one was his mother. And then we got talking, and I said, what are you doing here today? I didn't know that he was then, like I was, a member of the Church of England. He says, teaching myself the organ. So I said, oh, right. He said, but I can't get in because it's locked. So there he was, just out of the army, hadn't made his mind up fully a few years before whether he was going to play rugby for Arnold or whether he was going to do what that fella had seen him do, which would be absolutely magical with a ball. And he says, I'm still making my mind up. He says, but I do like this little church. I said, well, you'd better get used to it. It's the smallest one in the diocese, and we haven't got a lot of money and we haven't got a lot of people. He says, we'll change that, and he did. The next thing, of course, is I met Anne. Anne also became a member of the Church of England, and we became friends. I was born and bred a Sheffield United fan. And once James got used to the idea that I would still love the Blades until the day I died, he accepted me as one of his friends. But he did make a point, I've got a thing here, where I was in the south of England and I was thanking a private school that brought food up to Blackpool children every Christmas. And they were a marvellous school, they were a private school. One of their pupils had seen that we had a lot of poor children in Blackpool, so they started collecting in Tesco's and whoever, and then they used to come up to... They came up the year when Maxine was the mayor. I remember Maxine taking them for the poor children. And I'd gone down there to thank the pupils, because the head had been thanked, but the pupils hadn't. The BBC were giving James one of his first accolades, as you might say, with a load of people asking him questions, asking him what it to be, what he was going to do. He says, well, where's the mayor? So this lady said, well, she's gone to thank these people, and he says, can't do it without the mayor. So what the BBC did, I mean, I know we often call them, they sent someone down to where I was in Hazel somewhere or other, right in the south of England. Sid had taken me in the car in FB1, of course, in those days, and it was chucking it down with snow, and it's freezing cold. The BBC walked in, all these people sat having the dinner and grateful to me for coming and thanking them for, and he said, you've got to do a thing about James Armfield. He's sat there and he's waiting for you to, as the mayor of Blackpool, to stand up and say what you think about him. So I did. And then I got a beautiful, beautiful note thanking me very much for what I had done. James is enjoying himself. He's having an absolute ball. He knows the answer to all the questions. So my answer to that was, he always does. And then she said, and also he's left a message for you. And the answer to the thing on this paper was, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your mayoral year, and enjoy the rest of your mayoral year, and good luck to Blackpool and Sheffield United. And so that's the answer that he sent me back. So when our friendship matured, when he used to come to the mic, when he had time from working for the BBC, etc., we'd sit inside behind the glass, and for 90 minutes he would tell me what you'd all done wrong on the pitch. And I'd have to sit and I daren't move. And I daren't answer him back because he knew a lot more than I did. But our friendship was brilliant, it really was. We had fun with it, and everything that went on with that. We didn't have to see each other once a day, once a week, Mr. Mayor. If we met going into church, which we did because we were on the parochial church council, we wanted to call the bishops to task to try and get a man we wanted to be the vicar of the church at St. Peter's, and we nearly finished up getting the church closed. And James and I were there. We weren't going to go to church anymore until we went the next day, of course, and that was us. And then it came to the pitch where the children were growing up, and I had taken my sister's children when she got killed. Anne was, by this time, was the head nurse at South Shore Hospital. She took one of the girls under her wing, and to learn, teach her to be a nurse. She's still in that profession, is Joanne, and loves every minute of it, and says she owes it all to Mrs. Armfield. And I said to James, I'm very upset. My son's getting married. He's getting married on a weekday in St. Peter's Church, and that's the day you're working for the BBC. Being James, what did he do? He rang up the BBC and said, we'll make the meeting for later on. I've got to play the organ for Lily Henderson's son. And he did. So he played the organ for my son's wedding. This was the sort of person that he was. We went and cut loads of ribbons together. We were always opening or shutting shops, the pair of us, together. When I was mayor of Blackpool, my birthday fell on a Friday, 31st of October, and I got to here, and I said, I'm surprised. Where is James? He's not come. I walked in here, and everybody stood up and sang happy birthday to you. 9 o'clock in the morning, he'd got them all together, and he'd come out another day when he was going to be late in London, Manchester rather. But that was James. He never, ever didn't keep his word. That's what I liked about him. He was honest, and Anne was the best partner he could have had. I don't know how she put up with him sometimes, because she'd get all ready, she'd get the boys ready, and he'd come and he'd say, oh, just remembered, I've got to go to a match. So they'd have to go to Wolverhampton or somewhere or other, and Anne would go with him, and that was it. And there were times where there was once a match on at Newcastle, nobody to go. So who went? Lily Henderson, and we went up all the way to Newcastle to watch a night match, because that was the sort of person he was. He would do it, and he would expect you to do it as well, and you would do it. And when Mrs. Thompson was given a whole week on BBC to be interviewed as what she had done for Blackpool, she says, well, Lily will come with me because she can hear better than I can. And one day she says, we'll ask that Mr. Armfield. You never got first names with Mrs. Thompson. I was her friend from coming to live in Blackpool, and I was still, I was councillor by that time, but I was Councillor Henderson when she died. She never once called you. So anyhow, we were on the promenade in this beautiful car, and it was the last day we were coming to the town hall, and the BBC man said to Doris, you know, it's been a lovely week. Thank you very much. He said, and he said to me, and I'm sorry, Mr. Armfield, he had to call him Mr. Armfield as well because she was there. You couldn't be with us all week, but we've really enjoyed your company. It's been brilliant. We weren't getting any photographs in the Gazette. We weren't getting no publicity on the BBC. James and I were still there enjoying every minute of it. So the BBC man turned around and he said, tell me, Mrs. Thompson, why do you always choose the Mercedes to go out in? And she looked at him and she says, young man, are there any other type of car? And James and I used to use that for weeks afterwards because I still had my little yellow and white, what it cost me tuppence in. James wasn't rich in those days. But that was the sort of person he was. They're the memories I've got of him. I mean, the photographs I've got with him and me and Mrs. Thompson and with us when we gave an honour to Stan Mortison. And we all went to I think it was the Imperial, where we went for lunch or somewhere. And what a lot of people didn't know was that Stan was starting to be ill. And we spent practically the whole of that lunch telling him things, so to remind him of what had happened. James was telling him about football, etc. And it was amazing how he was with him. He wasn't sort of condescending or look at him, he's losing his memory or he's getting older or anything. He was brilliant. But that has been, Mr. Mayor, the relationship I've had with him all these years. It's been absolutely wonderful. The very last time I saw him was the first time I'd been to the football club since I went blind. And James was under the impression that I had stopped supporting Blackpool Football Club. He found out I was there, came in to sit with me, and he says, I'm at the hospital tomorrow. He'd got a lump. This was just before he started his last illness. And he said, how are you going on? And he said, I thought you were being naughty. I will give him his due. We had two things that we never talked about. One was the trouble, and the other was Holloway. Because you can't get me to love that man no matter how you try. We had a great team before we got into the Premiership. And that was the only thing we used to argue about, but we never discussed anything. He used to say, Blackpool is Blackpool and it's number one. And he would never, and he would still, if asked to give any advice to the people at the club who were still there, he would go and he would talk. But he did say to me, thank you for not giving up your seat. And I shall take that with me to my dying day. The only thing I'm very sorry about is that the things that we had planned we were going to do when he'd had his last lot of treatment, of course, he'll be doing it up there now because he'll be telling them all what to do up there. He can't help it, it's his nature. But having said that, he's been a wonderful friend. Anne has been a wonderful friend. And when I look back on the hard time I had, especially after my sister got killed and had 3 young children to bring up, not sympathy, not crying tears with me, but saying, why don't you let them go and try this? Why don't you go with them, Lily? And that's the sort of things you look for in friendship. My father used to say, you should only have that number of friends. If one dies, you can put another one there. But when you've got that number of friends, you've been very lucky. And I was very lucky that both the Armfields were very good friends. And that St. Peter's Church, even though I'm at St. Christopher's now, St. Peter's Church will always have a special place in my heart because it was a church that was small. It was in an area where people kept going and coming. It was one of the poorer sides of Blackpool, as you know. And there was James learning how to play the organ. There was me being Sunday school superintendent. There was Anne in the choir. And a lot more people who lived round there, who lived in the boarding houses, etc. It was a marvellous, marvellous experience being at St. Peter's Church. And Derek, God bless him, has just driven me past it now to come here for the meeting tonight, because I wanted to say, in case something happens before next Thursday, I wanted to say thank you, James, thank you, Anne, for all your friendship, for me, as well as for all the other people that everybody has enjoyed in all of these years through knowing James Armfield.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henderson. Are there any other speakers? If I may, I knew Jimmy rather well, and if I could be forgiven for taking this opportunity, I'd just like to speak about 1 hour of his time that was spent, and it will be a lot less than that, I do assure you, when he opened one of my Poppython shows at the Royal British Legion Club. It was very kind of Jimmy, and forgive me calling him Jimmy, but that's how I always knew him. It was very kind of Jimmy to come to the Poppython. It raised money for those service personnel who was fallen on times, and it's the Poppy appeal we were looking after. Jimmy came, and he did have a show going on very shortly afterwards, within an hour or two. But Jimmy came nonetheless, and it shows you and proves how generous he was with his time. When we come to cut the ribbon, which we always did on the opening of a Poppython, had a football beneath my right arm. Jimmy cut the ribbon. I put the football on the ground once the ribbon had been cut. And I passed the ball to him, Jimmy looking at me goggle-eyed, wondering what's happened. And I said, would you mind passing it me back, please, Jimmy? Which he did. And I picked that ball up. I've entrapped it with my foot. Very good, very good. And then I turned round to Jimmy, because everyone in the audience was wondering what was happening. And I said, now I can tell everyone I played football with Jimmy Armfield. It went very well, I do assure you. The audience was ecstatic with Jimmy. He a very, very wonderful man. And on that moment when I picked that ball up and explained why I'd done it, and the appreciation Jimmy got for kicking that ball back to me, proved how much he was loved by practically everyone in this town. In fact, I would suggest everyone. We then moved up to the mayoress of today. My wife Mavis was there at this particular Poppython, and we sat with her, and Jimmy brought out his World Cup winners medal. Ladies and gentlemen, they are rarer in England than hen's teeth. To have a World Cup medal in front of me, and Jimmy passed it to my wife Mavis, and it didn't have a ridge in it where the coin fitted that box, as I recall. And as Mavis got hold of it, the medal dropped out of the box, hit the floor, rolled under fitted seating. I couldn't see it anywhere. I dived underneath trying to hunt it out under the seating, and I'm hoping there's no cracks under here, otherwise we'll have to, if there are any cracks under here and that's gone down it, we'll have to knock the building down to find this. It's that precious. We found it, and Jimmy Armfield was always, right throughout that experience, just as calm could be. Jimmy was he was so placid, and I think you'll find that proves what a steadfast man he was. I was so proud to know him, and I'll close with these few words now. On the pitch, Jimmy was the supreme player. Off of the pitch, Jimmy was the supreme gentleman. Finally, may I say that Jimmy Armfield, CBE, will always remain one of Blackpool's and humanity's greatest legends. Thank you. We now have to take a vote on the resolution. All those in favour, please show. And forgive me, I will do that also. Unanimous. Thank you. If you excuse me just a moment. Thank you. It's executive reports. Leader of the council, Councillor Blackburn, to speak. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It may not be immediately apparent to people, but perhaps I should explain, Mr. Mayor. I asked Councillor Jackson and Councillor Owen to move and second the resolution of condolence because they were the people who moved and seconded Jimmy's freedom of the borough back in 2003, which is the first council meeting I attended as an observer then, prior to the election. So and they both spoke incredibly well, as did all the other speakers. And I thank them for that. Mr. Mayor, delighted to present my report. Members will see that despite ongoing demand pressures in children's services, particularly children's social care, the Council is on track to deliver an end-of-year financial position that sees working balances remain at or above their target mark of 3 million. Council tax collection rates are up on last year, bringing in an additional £1.8 million. Business rate collection is up on last year by almost 2%, bringing in an additional £1.2 million. Although borrowing has increased by more than 50% since 2013, that money has been borrowed to invest in infrastructure or to enable new private sector development, rather than to fund day-to-day activity. And incredibly, the amount of interest we pay on that borrowing is lower now than it was in 2013, by almost 7%. Huge thanks need to go to our Treasurer, Steve Thompson, and all of his team for that amazing achievement. Paying less interest on 200 million than we were on 140 million is quite an achievement. I'm delighted that a private sector partner has come on board to potentially offer a new site for the Blackpool Museum. We remain hopeful that external funding bids will be successful, allowing the project to move forward. I attended the Lancashire Enterprise Partnership Board last night in Preston, where an update on the master planning process for Blackpool Airport was very well received. We now believe that our initial projection of 3,000 new jobs on the site looks very conservative with a small c, and believe that it is likely to be nearer 5,000 jobs over 25 years. Councillor Galley may wish to put a note in his diary to check with me in 2041 that we've delivered on that pledge. As is noted in the report, I have given evidence to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee on Blackpool's unique housing challenges. I'll be welcoming the Chair of the Homes and Communities Agency, Sir Ed Lister, to Blackpool on the 13th of February. And I gather on the same day we are to be blessed by a visit from the Secretary of State for Education, Mr. Mayor, in breaking news. In the highly unlikely event that anyone is able to spot a tunnel at the end of all of that light, I should be delighted to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blackburn. I thank you, and it'll be questions and comments page by page. And page 7. No questions? Councillor Williams? Oh, sorry, you're so close to me I couldn't see you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to echo the Leader's remarks in regard to the collection of the rates. I think you've done a sterling job on that. Great improvement on the previous years, and I just hope we can maintain this with any increases that are about to be implemented. So well done indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any other speakers on page 7? Page 8. Thank you, Councillor Clapham.
Thank you. It's only a short question. It's to do with Blackpool Transport Services. We now know pays a dividend to the borough. Could the Leader of the Council tell us when he thinks that Merlin will be in a similar position to pay funds towards the Council? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Page 8. Page 9. Thank you, Councillor Clapham.
It's the final line before it says working with partners. At the end of that line it says, and appropriate teams follow these up. It's to do with the strategy at Blackpool Airport. Well, I wouldn't have thought that would needed to be in the report. I would have thought it was standard practice to follow up any leads to get people onto the site to make it grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more on page 9? Page 10? Thank you. It's Councillor Callow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask the council leader a question that came to me today? Marks and Spencer's are closing many stores up and down the land. I don't know if you heard that sad news, but have we heard anything about the fate of the Blackpool store? Because this is a very important part of the town centre. I don't know whether anything's come to you at all, any whispers, what have you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callow. Thank you. Yes, I think you had your hand up first, didn't you, Councillor Clapham?
It was in the final paragraph of the report from the leader. I just wanted to say that I do hope that we gain government support in order to improve the quality of the rented properties in Blackpool. This should help to achieve healthier residents, and will be good housing is one of the things that we do try to achieve on the health and well-being board. It's one of the main objectives we've got, and if we can build from a better housing basis, then we'll end up with better residents, we'll be healthier, and we'll achieve a lot. So these meetings of the ministers coming here into Blackpool, Councillor Blackburn, we know are very, very important, and you've got our full support on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To follow up on Councillor Clapham's point, yeah, likewise, I was delighted to see the report presentation that the leader will be making to the Government Select Committee into standards of the private rented sector. It's not for me to advise him what to say, obviously, but a suggestion. I know, but a suggestion. Briefly. Yeah. That you may want to take forward with them as well is an area that isn't often considered, and I believe should be, is the nature of the relationship between finance and landlords, and that we have a number of reputable banks lending to slum landlords, and that there is an opportunity there to actually questioning the finance sector, not just in terms of the regulation of how it operates, but who it lends to as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Galley. Any other wishing to speak on this? Thank you. Any general questions? Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Callow.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You may recall that I've mentioned the former Clifton Hotel on many occasions that's situated here on the corner of Talbot Square in a conservation area. I do thank the leader of the council for following up my complaints about this, and thank him for the email that he sent me. I wonder, have we heard from the company at all? We really will have to keep these people on their toes, and I do hope that we've had a satisfactory response to the email that we have sent to them. And if I could just pick up on the Marks and Spencer's issue, it has been announced that there will be 8 stores closed up and down the country, starting with Easter time. It is extremely worrying, Mr. Mayor. As most people know, I go in Marks and Spencer's at least once a week, and it really isn't as busy as it should be. And the last thing that this town wants is to lose our Marks and Spencer's. So I just wondered if the leader knows anything at all about it, about the future of our store, and if we can put pressure on Marks and Spencer's to continue to trade in this town, because they are much needed. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any more on general? Yes, Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'm intrigued that the leader of the council continues to try and formulate a combined authority in Lancashire, when Lancashire themselves, under Councillor Driver, have made it absolutely clear they have no intention of entering into such an agreement. That's been made to me personally as well. I just wonder what development could be held now, because I understand the leader is trying to pick up the scraps of the other councils in the area to still form a combined authority. However, I just don't see how that can happen if the main player in this, which is Lancashire County Council, are not willing to be part of it. And secondly, would he not have thought better to form stronger partnerships with our neighbouring councils by forming a unitary of the Fylde? Rubbish. I don't think it's rubbish. I think it's a damn good idea. But it's just a question, and I hope you can answer it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Thank you. Are there any more general questions? Then Councillor Blackburn, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Williams, thank you for your congratulations to Mr Thompson. The income and debt recovery team and all the other teams in finance do work incredibly hard to make sure that we maximise the council's income. It's pleasing to see those collection rates going up, and I, like him, hope to see that continue. Councillor Clapham, as I'm sure you're aware, what's referred to as the leisure assets deal, the 15-year deal that we have, that was crafted, in case anybody's forgotten, by Councillor Peter Callow, and he was a leader of the council. I know he likes me to mention that from time to time. That is a 15-year lease agreement with Merlin, and there is a profit share in there. Once a certain number of people have visited those attractions, there is a profit share over and above that. That is, of course, both hypothecated in terms of that money being reinvested in the leisure assets and spending on the Winter Garden, spending on the tower and in terms of infrastructure, and it's also subject to commercial confidentiality. So no, I can't. What I will say is that I'm perfectly satisfied with the deal, and I think Councillor Callow did a very good deal in that respect. Councillor Clapham, that sentence is in there to preempt a possible question from Councillor Galley about, well, that's all well and good, but what's happening to all these inquiries? We do listen. If I can take the Councillor Callow and Mrs Callow's question about Marks and Spencer's together, we are as confident as we can be that the Blackpool store will remain open. As far as we understand, it's areas where there are 2 stores. One of them is successfully operating out on an out-of-town retail estate, which is something we've always resisted here because we privilege the town centre. It's likely that those will remain open, but ones in city centres may close because people are using the one out of town because it's easier to get to and easier to park. We will continue to monitor the situation because I like both of them, would be very, very sorry to lose Marks and Spencer's, but we've no reason to think that's going to happen anytime soon. Councillor Clapham, I never miss an opportunity to talk to ministers or civil servants or anybody who I feel is influential about Blackpool's housing challenge. We set out very clearly when we were elected in 2011 that that was the key driver to all of the indicators that we see all of the time. You mentioned health and well-being. There are many, many more. As noted in the report, I met with the Secretary of State at what was then the DCLG just before Christmas and was able to have a frank conversation with him. He's asked for more information about possible solutions or part solutions to the problem. I had a meeting with Baroness Valentine in the House of Lords on Monday. I then had a meeting with Greg Clark, the Secretary of State at Business, Industrial Strategy and something else. This is snappily titled. Where again we touched on that issue and what could be done in terms of the government's industrial strategy to drive growth in Blackpool, which will help us to sort out the housing issues. Sir Ed is coming in February. And I gave evidence to the Select Committee on Monday, which is available on their website, if you would like to see it and see whether or not I tick the boxes that you mentioned. But I will, he raises an interesting point about the link between big banks and financing slum landlords. That is something that I'll give further thought to Councillor Mrs Callow, the former Clifton Hotel. Have we had a response? Not as far as I know, but I shall ask Councillor Campbell to investigate further and get back to us. Councillor Williams describes 11 out of 15 councils in Lancashire as the scraps. I'm sure they'll be delighted to hear that. I am not trying to form a combined authority with the scraps, 11 out of 15 authorities. What we are committed to doing is continuing to work together. There will be a combined authority meeting in a couple of weeks' time where the 4 authorities who say they don't want to be part of it are going to come and explain why they don't want to be part of it and to tell us what we could do to get them on board. Because this is hugely important, Mr Mayor, and it remains a constant source of disappointment that Councillor Williams doesn't understand this or pretends not to understand it. Lancashire is falling further and further behind Greater Manchester and Merseyside as every day goes by, with 2 powerful elected Metro mayors striding up Downing Street and carving up the Northern Powerhouse and the government's industrial strategy between those 2 conurbations. We are missing out. There is potentially 800,000 jobs at stake here, 800,000 new jobs. Billions, tens of billions of pounds worth of gross value added that could be in the Lancashire economy but isn't at the moment, because we've got to get our strategic transport networks right, we've got to get our marketing right, we've got to make our enterprise zones work, and we do all of that by working together and not by being parochial. Interestingly, I did raise the subject of a unitary filed coast council at a recent meeting of the Lancashire leaders. And I said, of course, because if we don't have a combined authority, there is a risk that the government imposes local government reorganisation upon us. And that could lead to a unitary filed council. And that would be the worst of all worlds, because it would be Conservative controlled forever, which would be me and most of us. But it would be the worst thing in the world for Filed and Wire, because all of their money would end up getting sucked into Blackpool. And when I said that, the leaders of Filed and Wire agreed with me. So, you know, Councillor Williams, the Conservative group has always been against a City of the Filed Council. This desire for one is a reasonably recent development. It wouldn't work. There is a very good reason why Blackpool is a unitary authority. Councillor Taylor can explain that in far more detail than I can. But he's not going to. You beat me to it. I was just in silent brackets, but he's not going to. There are huge benefits. We work very well with Filed and Wire on a day-to-day basis. We've just signed a new benefits service to provide benefits to Filed for the next 5 years. That's a multi-million-pound service. We, at the last council meeting, formed the new Economic Prosperity Board, where we will work on a formal footing with Filed and Wire. I have been asked to chair that. As we move forward. So there is not a binary choice between doing what Councillor Williams would do and sitting in an office here, never leaving Blackpool, focusing only on Blackpool and not looking beyond its borders, or working with Filed and Wire, or working across Lancashire, or with anybody else for whom it is practicable and efficient for us to work. There is no reason why all of those things cannot be done at the same time. But we achieve what we achieve by being outward-looking. We get all of these people to come up here, and I get in the diaries of all of these people in London, ministers, civil servants, policy makers, people who can create change, who can do the things that we need to be done by being outward-looking, not by sitting here and navel-gazing. And this pushing against progress and this pushing against joint working would be an absolute tragedy for the town. And for as long as I'm here, Mr Mayor, we won't do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. We move now on to page 11, and this is the Deputy Leader of the Council, Tourism, Economic Growth and Jobs, and it's Councillor Gillian Campbell, if you'd be so kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to present my report and I will take any questions. I just have one quick update for members and this will please my lot, no doubt. It's just that we will shortly be launching a pop-up shop. You may have seen quite a lot is happening in the town centre at the moment, and we're going to be launching our pop-up shop or facility, which will provide residents, businesses and visitors with information in relation to what's actually going on in the town centre at the moment. It will give people the opportunity to speak to the highways team, regarding any queries related to traffic, etc. So I do have some other ones, but I'll no doubt be asked questions about them anyway. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Are there any questions on page 11? Thank you. Thanks, Councillor, forgive me, Gally. I'll get you eventually.
Don't worry, thank you, Mr Mayor. It was just to follow up on the success of Project 30 for Councillor Campbell, Mr Mayor. It's with great pleasure that we noted success, and I just wondered if there was a plan as we move forwards in terms of how that will sit with the road asset management strategy, if we will look to develop another project type 30, again, be that Project 20, Project 10 or whatever the amount may be, but in order to support the management strategy of our roads.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Any more questions on page 11? Sorry, Councillor Humphreys. Hide in there.
Can I just say that I'm about the bridge on Harriside? Sorry, can I don't like standing up. Can I just say that I'm really glad for the work that's been done to get the Harriside bridge open so quickly, and that special thanks to the departments that have been involved, and the fact that we've involved the community from step one, and they've worked very, very hard with us. And I'm sure that's part of the reason why it's worked so smoothly and so successfully. So just thank you very much to the community and the department. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more questions on page 11? Page 12. Councillor Galley.
Mrs. Kelly. Mrs. Kelly.
Oh, I thought your arm was coming through, is then? Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr Mayor. About protection orders, shout me down if I'm incorrect on doing this at this point, but I want to say something about the beggars in the town, and in particular, one chap who sits near the Grand Theatre in the little walkway to get through to Victoria Street. Every time I walk down there, he's sitting there begging. Now, if I know he's there, Mr Mayor, then other people must know he's there, and he's never moved. It's as though he's there 24/7. And it isn't good enough because he's a nuisance, he's asking people for money, and there's also a woman who walks around the town approaching people for money. Now, this can be quite intimidating if you're in a vulnerable position, if you're elderly or disabled or anything, and this woman comes up and asks people for money. Now, I'm encountering these people, so why aren't the powers that be? And why aren't we doing something about it? I know that beggars are a problem throughout the country, but when they're persistent and they're in the same positions week in, week out, then surely somebody can do something about it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Keller. Councillor Galley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's an extension to the work of public protection. It's really through Councillor Campbell's involvement with Be Safe and ASBRAC. And it isn't a question aimed towards this council, but more our relationship with the police in terms of priorities. Before Christmas, members may have seen an email from a taxi driver called Lee Yeomans. And in that email, he summarised his experience at the end of stone throwing. And he said a key phrase for me that concerned me and also matched my own experience. He said, police are constantly around with regard to groups of youths gathering in the same areas and nothing being done. This is becoming an epidemic, and I'm sure will at some point end with someone being killed. Now, there's been a huge number of issues raised as well through the Blackpool Council's own Blackpool South Health and Wellbeing inquiry recommendations raised through the public that attended. And in those, even the public have said the police are understandably reluctant to criminalise youths who are involved in antisocial behaviour. And the concern by the taxi drivers and many other people around the town, and this isn't aimed at our council because it's not in our gift, but that the police aren't criminalising some of the gang leaders who are responsible when they should be, because somebody, as that taxi driver said, will be killed if this isn't targeted or they aren't targeted in their behaviour. So I wondered, or my question for Councillor Campbell, Mr Mayor, is if she can raise this as a matter of priority in those meetings that she has with the police and actually instill some confidence back with the public of the town in our police force.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more questions on page 12? Page 13? Oh, sorry, Councillor Williams.
Mr Mayor, it actually starts on page 12, this, but it goes to page 13 in regard to the end of the most disruptive construction and diversions in the town. It's been stated that the tramway track to the junction of Talbot Road and Dixon Road will be completed in April 2019. However, Wilco's have confirmed that they will not be moving out of their existing site any time during 2018 and do not have a date to start the construction of a new store and a cinema complex. This is from them. This is from Wilco's themselves. On January 13th, the senior member of staff from Light Cinemas confirmed that no deal had been finalised yet, but that he remains hopeful that a premium IMAX screen as part of a new cinema complex can be delivered. Hopeful. The length of time required to build the complex is 18 months, and it's doubtful that the construction will begin on this site in 2018. So therefore, Wilco's will not be able to move until possibly 2020, and any suggestion that they could move in half-built project is ludicrous. That means the tram station might not be built until 2020 and not operational until much later in that year. In regard to the Premier Inn site in Talbot Square, Councillor Campbell has stated that work is expected to start in November 2018. This differs significantly from the statement put out by this council that the hotel should have been completed before the tram extension was instigated. However, it now most certainly looks like the extension will be at least half built before they break ground on the Premier site. Not only that, a communication from Premier Inn's appointed agents, Turley's, received this month states quite clearly that there is no fixed date to start building this year. In addition, if Councillor Campbell is correct about a November start, Premier Inn will have to reapply for planning permission because the current planning permission runs out in July of this year. And I don't want to see any automatic extensions. They have to do what everybody else does, is reapply. The whole situation is a complete shambles, with no confirmed agreements. It's okay shaking your head, but nobody's saying they've got any deal going here. The dates are all over the place. It's a shambles. And as for our Holiday Inn at the top of Talbot Road, I've said it before and I'll say it now. When we win the election in 2019, that hotel will not go ahead. We will build a bus station to serve the offices that are going to be built round it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions on page? Thank you. Any other questions, page 13? Oh, forgive me, Councillor Blackburn.
I wonder if Councillor Campbell might be able to assist me. Perhaps it's my great age, and I'm getting confused, but I thought Conservative Party policy was to build a bus station on the site of the Hop Inn. Or are they just making up policy on the Hop? Maybe that's where I'm getting confused.
Thank you. I think that's answered itself. You? Thank you. We move to page 14. Any questions on page 14? Page 15. General.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, sorry, we have a question. Thank you. Councillor Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure everyone's seen and heard about the craze of bus surfing around Blackpool, where youngsters cling onto the back of buses and then whilst they're moving along, they ride along them. In most cases, bus drivers can't actually see behind what's going on. There's been a rise in these sightings around Blackpool in recent weeks. While this may seem like an innocent prank to some, the dangers of this illegal act can end with someone seriously injured or even killed. Whilst I understand this is a police matter, can I just ask how we can offer support to Blackpool Transport in their work towards making it safe? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Mrs Callow. I am Councillor Williams.
Mr Mayor, I'm sure that the members here will remember not many weeks ago of the car park in Liverpool that set fire and 1,600 cars were destroyed. Fortunately, Mr Mayor, I believe that no people were actually hurt in this tragedy. But I would just like to ask, have we got sprinklers in our car parks? Have we got them in the Talbot Road car park and West Street? I know we don't own West Street, we rent that. And we also built one at Victoria Hospital. Now, it does actually engage your mind to think if this was to happen again and somewhere in Blackpool, it's very, very frightening. So I just wondered, Mr Mayor, if we do have sprinklers in these car parks. If not, are there any plans at all to put them in place? Now, I'm sure that all the councillors have had a begging letter about the state of the bus shelters in Blackpool. And it is very worrying because people use these and rely on them, especially in bad weather. But they are quite costly to repair or to replace. Years ago, we used to have a contract with Adshell. Has it gone? Were they not an easy company to deal with? Is there not a way that we could, through advertising or something, raise some revenue to help to repair or replace some of our bus shelters? It would be a great help, not just to the council, but to the people of Blackpool. But also, the dividends that we get from the bus company. Could some of these not be used to improve the bus shelters? Because people who are using the buses are using the bus shelters. So is there no way that some of this money could be moved over to repair a certain number of bus shelters or replace them each year? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I note, Councillor Campbell, that we've disbanded our agreement or our partnership with our litter collectors, or our litter army, I should say. But I was surprised to hear that they got £137,000 from fines through the courts, presumed to walk away, and we didn't get a penny. What kind of agreement was that? When G3, G4, whatever they're called, got £137 and are not continuing with the contract. Because we evidently have learnt a lot from what they've done. Well, I hope we have, because £137,000 is a lot of money in my bank. So let's hope we can do something with it. But just tell me, if you can, please, what kind of contract did we have with them, that they walk away with all the money and we get nought?
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Galley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a question, but before I do, I know Blackpool Transport's been mentioned quite a bit recently, so I should declare an interest, as a personal interest, as a non-executive member of that board. The question I wanted to ask, though, it actually follows on from a campaign that Councillor Mrs Callow's led towards the old Clifton Hotel. We recently had a fire at the Ambassador Hotel, and in the same spirit that we've been working in terms with that landlord to repair that building, will we be doing, or are we, I'm sure we are, a campaign to force the landlord not only to make safe, but to sell it to somebody who actually wants to do something with that building and operate it properly? The Ambassador pays. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr Mayor.
Right. Sorry.
So just for clarification purposes, I understand there are board members wishing to declare interest, but I'd be just from my perspective as monitoring officer, I think the discussion and the questions that's been asked around BTS is around the council's use of the dividend, not the company's use of the dividend. So therefore, I think if anybody wishes to speak on the matter who is a board member of BTS, they would declare a personal interest like Councillor Galley has done. But I think there's no requirement to declare a personal interest otherwise. But if you do wish to speak, then I would advise board members to declare a personal interest. If the debate does go into the financial position of Blackpool Transport, then that would be a different matter and they would need to declare up a judicial interest at that point. But I think Councillor Galley is absolutely correct with his declaration.
Thank you. Councillor Clapham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was just wondering what happened to the reports that we used to get on the contracts and services that we'd actually agreed with the borough to other people, so that we knew what was actually being spent and who was actually supplying the goods, etc. Is it going to return?
Any more general questions? Well, yes, thank you. Councillor Mrs Scott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It was already clarified at the beginning of the meeting that the question I asked at the last meeting didn't make reference to council-owned properties or council tenants. So just for clarification, can I please request a reply to the question that I did ask with regard to the numbers of complaints received from any resident with regard to failed cavity wall installation or an inadequate installation of insulation, because a lot of people had cavity wall insulation installed on recommendation from a leaflet that was delivered with this council's logo and sponsorship on it. So I'd like a response to that from any resident now, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more questions on general? Thank you very much. Then Councillor Campbell, if you'd like to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Firstly, Councillor Galley, for the project, interesting idea. I can't say that we've actually discussed it, but I am definitely willing to look at that. I think it would be very useful. Project 30 has been fantastic when it's come to our road maintenance and been, obviously, you guys set it up, and that does note that in the report. We're very, very pleased with it. But certainly I shall have that discussion and see if we can come up with anything further. Councillor Humphreys, Harrowside Bridge. Your thanks to the department. Yeah, I've got a little bit of an announcement about Harrowside Bridge, actually. People may have seen that we had said that it would reopen on the 12th of February. I can tell the Chamber that things have been progressed so quickly that we will actually be reopening, drum roll, yeah, Harrowside Bridge at 5 o'clock on Friday the 2nd of February. Wow. So, and that's got nothing to do with the fact that I now live in Squaresgate at all. Okay. So yeah, really pleased with that piece of work. They've been fantastic. The businesses have been great. And I'd just like to thank them for their support. It's been very difficult. Obviously, it was an emergency repair. But I think a whole 7 weeks ahead of schedule is something to be celebrated. I can also say that Squires Gate Bridge will reopen on the 16th of March rather than the 23rd. So very pleased with that as well. Councillor Mrs Callow, I have actually seen that gentleman myself, I think you're right. I have had a report this week to say that we have identified 19 individuals in the town centre who are problematic and are currently almost on the radar of all the services. It's something that obviously I'm trying to tackle at the moment. It is extremely difficult. We tend to deal with one person and help them out, and then another one pops up. But you may have seen that we've had some advertisements on the side of bus shelters and things like that, asking people, rather than give money to people who are sitting on the street, to donate to the food partnership, and about a week and a half ago I was told that we had already raised in a very short period of time over £800, which will actually go towards small projects to help these people who are actually suffering from homelessness. And so I would encourage anyone to either donate to the food partnership via text message or food itself. Because it's not good. We're sustaining them to live on the street if we're given money. And I believe Homeless Link are of that opinion as well. Councillor Galley, yes, kind of ties in a little bit, I think, with what Councillor Taylor said. It is problematic, very, and I'm not quite sure how we deal with it. It is a policing matter, but we as a council and as a community safety partnership and councillors will support the BTS and the police in any way we can to try and solve this, because, you know, it's not only dangerous for the bus driver or the taxi driver, it's extremely dangerous for the children that are doing it, and I'm just very worried there's going to be a serious incident. So there will be a meeting within the next couple of days, because there was quite a serious incident last night, so we are on with it. Councillor Williams, yeah, well, okay, you may have phoned Wilco's and they may have said, well, we don't have a date yet. That is true, yeah? But I can tell you that they've appointed a project manager and they've also let the tender. So it's on its way. We may not have a specific date of when it's actually going to start being built, but there's no way that the Wilco's is not going to be built, and there's no way that the tramway is not going to happen. So I disappoint you. Premier Inn, when it comes to the Premier Inn, I am just as disappointed as you are. I think you'll find that my report actually says that it was supposed to start in November 17, obviously. That's been and gone. I do remain cautious about what they're telling us, but believe me, as soon as I can start getting the Premier Inn built, I will do. And also, you know, when it comes to planning matters, you said that, you know, you don't want an extension. Planning matters are a matter for the planning committee, not for myself. Councillor Blackburn, yeah, the HOP, the world's smallest bus station, and you say that that's not a policy. I think you'll find the Gazette actually printed that's what you said.
No, I said, why don't you do it?
No, you said that you would do it. Well, I'll find it for you. Councillor Luke Taylor, I think we've covered that with the bus surfing, and obviously we'll support BTS in any way that we possibly can as a council. And I'm sure that the police, they are taking the matter very seriously. It's about being there at the time that it's happening, though, because by the time a report comes through, they're gone. Councillor Mrs Callow, oh yeah, sprinklers in our car parks. I'm going to be honest, I really don't know about that, but I'll certainly find out for you. Retrofitting sprinklers obviously would cost millions of pounds in car parks, but I will find out for you, definitely. Councillor Williams, 3GS, it was cost neutral to the council. There is no denying that 3GS made some money out of that, but we didn't pay anything, and we got all our court costs back. So it was cost neutral. We've learnt from 3GS coming in, and we know that we can do it better ourselves, and that's exactly what we're doing at the moment. Councillor Galley, the Ambassador Hotel, yeah. I'll be honest with you, I'm not really aware of what's happening with that. I do know there was the fire, but I do know there was a lot of enforcement activity against the Ambassador. So I can get an update on that for you. Councillor Clapham, I knew you were going to ask about contracts. I've got a copy here for you. So I'll give you that at the end of the meeting. If you would like to see it back in the report, that's absolutely fine. We have nothing to hide. It's just that it takes up quite a lot of space, and we try and keep them as condensed as possible. But you can have that. I've got it for you. And Councillor Mrs Scott, I'm sorry if there was any misunderstanding about that, but I will make sure that we get that information for you. I imagine if there have been any complaints, they've went to our housing enforcement team, so they're able to tell us fairly straight away. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you. We now move to page 16, Cabinet Secretary's report, resilient communities. Councillor Graham Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pleasure to present the report and hopefully answer any questions that may come from it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any questions on page 17? Thank you, Councillor Clapham. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's on school improvement, page 17. First of all, I'd like to welcome the Good Ofsted Primary School report, which verifies that our primary schools continue to be excellent. They always perform very well. Also, that the recognition that the Fylde Coast Teaching Alliance is rated as outstanding. This should improve the teaching standards of our secondary teachers. This is crucial to lift the aspirations and attainments of our young people and gain improved GCSE results. Again, these are things that we really need to do in this town. If we can get better results at secondary level, then they can go on to sixth form, university. The world is their oyster. And we've always had this stumbling block. They do great through primary school. I don't know what happens between primary and secondary, whether there isn't enough interaction at year 6 to year 7 so that they can see what the big school looks like. But something certainly goes wrong within secondary education because we're still below the national figures, which is worrying. At the Catholic school, they've got the best results at secondary level, but they are an all-through school. So they go right the way through the whole school range up to sixth form without changing buildings, but they are within one site. So they know where they're going. They're used to seeing where the secondary school is. So perhaps if there was a case for more all-in-one schools, if that became available to academies, that could help. But the Fylde Coast Teaching Academy certainly doing a great job in terms of upgrading teachers. So it's all very good. We welcome the primary side. The secondary side just needs to catch up. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more? Councillor Campbell?
And if I will, if I could, can I just say, as a parent of one of the schools that was basically slated by the government earlier last week, St George's School, it upset my daughter greatly that it looked as though her school wasn't very good. She is doing absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of her friends were upset. They felt as though their school was being targeted, and I know it was other schools in Blackpool as well. But my point is that, you know, okay, some kids don't do very well at high school. Other kids do absolutely fantastic, and I think they get rolled together with the people that aren't doing very well, and that brings their self-esteem and confidence down. I know she's really struggled with it the past week, so I think sometimes we just need to take in the bigger picture. Some of them are doing absolutely fantastic. It's the ones that aren't that we need to support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any more questions on page 17? Page 18. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Galley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just two questions, if I may, Mr. Mayor, about the health visiting service enhancements for young children. I noticed the report talks of the health visiting service is now rolling out a new model that consists of 8 universal contacts to all families, which on paper sounds very good. I just wonder what the term of contacts actually means, if that's actually 6 visits plus 2 telephone calls or 6 visits plus 2 letters. The nature of the contact is also very relevant in the actual delivery of that service in terms of the measure of its quality. The second question is related to Better Start itself, and as we start to eke out those 10 years that we have the contract for, Mr. Mayor, my question is, what would Councillor Kane class as its greatest achievement so far, and also what would he say are the areas that it could be improved so that we can do something about it in its remaining years?
Thank you, Councillor. Any more questions on page 18? Page 19? Page 20. Page 21. Thank you.
Page 20.
Page 20?
Yeah.
You were slow.
I think you've got... No, I wasn't slow. I think you've got a blind spot just here.
I'll tell you about that later.
I'm going to bring an orange box next time. Anyway, it's on Fileco's self-care strategy. On reading this and going to the Integration 2020 conference, I think that this self-care smacks of survival of the fittest. It was quite upsetting to hear that if someone's in their own home and they are given support to become more mobile, that little bit fitter, more confident, to prevent falls and stay vertical, that they can live a good life in their own home. But we were told by one of the main practitioners there in our group that if an elderly person becomes so well that they can actually support themselves and walk outside their own home, the support is withdrawn, which goes against, as far as I can see, the whole of the strategy that we've got for help in the home for the elderly. And it was mentioned to Councillor Kane as he rounded the conference off at the end, and he did say he would look into that. He was quite upset about it as well, naturally. I just wondered how far you've got with your inquiries on that, because we do like to put support into elderly people so that they can maintain a good lifestyle in their own home, and this obviously relieves the pressure on NHS services, either in the hospital or with the GP and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions on page 20? I'll look through the blind spot first. Page 21. Thank you. General questions, thank you. And Councillor Mrs. Callow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it saddens me that I've got to bring this subject up to the full council once again. I think this is the third time that I've addressed the council on this regarding the gentleman, Mr. Dennis Oldland, who tragically died in the council's care, really. It was care at home. The director of adult social care, I contacted her before Christmas, and I've contacted her again in the last few days, and her response has been the report still isn't ready, that they're hoping that it will come any day now. But actually, I had a meeting with her on the 27th of September last year, and the coroner in the Gazette's report of the 30th of October asked for a report from Safe Hands. They were the company who was supposed to be caring for this gentleman in 56 days. Now, I have repeatedly asked for a full report. I want it to come to every councillor, and it is very, very worrying that something as serious as this is taking so long. You know, we're nearly into February now, and it's just dragging on and on and on. But I'm not going to let it go, Mr. Mayor, because it was very upsetting, not just for me, but for the family, and tragically, this gentleman did die. So the sooner we get this report, the better, and I would like the Director of Adult Social Care to put some more pressure on these people and give them a time at certain dates and say, we want this report on her desk, and then it can go out to all the councillors. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. And any more general questions? Thank you, Councillor Williams. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was very sorry to read that we've had two large families come into care for whatever reason. But I'm also very sorry that it's something I've requested from the portfolio holder more than one occasion in this council chamber, that if we could have the up-to-date numbers in the council report of looked after children. What gets measured gets done. And if you could provide me with those tonight, I'd be very grateful. The other subject, Mr. Mayor, I don't expect a response from because there are some legal issues in regard to it. But just a couple of days before Christmas, a young man climbed on the top of Sainsbury's roof and threw himself off the building next to the council offices. That man was under the care of Blackpool Council. I'm not purporting blame. That's for the coroner to work out why that man did it. He was 16 years old. He was cremated on the 18th of January, probably with a very little service and very little attention. I want a report, a full report, as to why, under our care, we should lose a man, a young man of 16 years of age, who it never was reported in the Gazette that anything had happened. I understand there are some legal proceedings, or not proceedings, but complications, let me put it that way. I don't expect a response, Councillor Kane, but I just think it's ultimately extremely sad that a young man of 16 with his life in front of him should decide to throw himself off a building whilst in our care. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Galley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on some recommendations that I witnessed and experienced as part of this Blackpool South and Blackpool North Health and Wellbeing Inquiry that a number of trial air wards have been in already. So Ankersone was in one, I think Highfield was, and this followed up some work that's been carried out in the central areas of Blackpool. I believe it will continue throughout the wards, the other wards of Blackpool. There were two observations that I picked up, Mr. Mayor. The first was from talking to some members of staff and also some residents that attended the first round of public consultations, that they felt it had somewhat fizzled out, that they'd turned up to the initial meetings, they'd passed through their citizen recommendations, and they felt that some things might have happened, but there wasn't any follow-up to it, and they felt sort of lost. And so a recommendation is what then happens to these groups moving forward. The other question that seemed to arise was the nature of the health and wellbeing officers at the local GPs and their disconnects between the public who present themselves at GPs with low forms of mental health issues from depression or isolation, and the disconnection on the other hand from voluntary groups who are looking for volunteers. So for example, what was often raised on the night was residents would say, I feel very depressed, and the all too often answer was, have some antidepressant pills. And what I picked up on the night was this very much top-down approach that, well, that's a GP issue, they've got an awful lot of work to do, they really haven't got time to do that. You need to speak to the health and wellbeing officer, but the health and wellbeing officer, although they've been in place for 6 months, doesn't seem to have that connection with either its public, certainly by the result of these findings, but also from the voluntary groups who are also saying we haven't even heard of the health and wellbeing officers. So to wrap all that up, the question is, how can we make sure that this doesn't fizzle out, that the citizens that present themselves are fully engaged 6 months, 12 months' time? And also, how do we give greater prominence to the health and wellbeing officers in terms of their relationship with both the public, the voluntary sector, and also, most importantly, the GPs, that they actually buy into this?
Thank you, Councillor Galley. Any more general questions? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Try and take them in the order that they came through. Welcome Councillor Clapham's comments and his praise for the schools and the Teaching Alliance. Yes, you are right that we do want better results in secondary schools. There's a lot of work going on at the moment with the School-Led Improvement Board. There's now families of schools that have come together on their own accord, and they're now working with the secondaries and primaries, and they've like got families of schools. So the secondaries are now saying that they're willing to learn from the primary. So there's a lot of work going on there. Just as a point of clarification, all the secondary schools in Blackpool are academies, but we continue to work with all the schools. There's regular meetings that Councillor Benson has, along with the Director of Children's Services and all the sponsors. So there is a lot of work. There's a long way to go, but I'm pleased with the results, and if we carry on this path that we're on, we should see some good results, and everybody deserves the best education, and especially our people in Blackpool. So the work that's been done over the last 6 months, I'm certain will continue for the next 6 months, and we're coming and making inroads there. Councillor Campbell, you mentioned about St George's. Yeah, it is an issue when people are saying their school's bad, but on saying that, some children do well, but it's, again, some work that we're doing with the Improvement Board is holding these people to account. So there is improvements afoot there, but I do know how it can knock people's confidence. But then the flip side of that is when you get an outstanding school, that boosts everybody, the parents as well as the teachers. Councillor Galley, you mentioned about the health visiting, the universal visits. Those are there'll be 8 home visits instead of the current 4. And there'll be additional if they are needing extra support. So, but these are home visits. One of them is just prior to school to get them ready for school readiness. You asked me about the Better Start 10-year project. Thanks to the lottery, £45 million project. What's the greatest achievements? Every achievement that they make is good. There's some of the level that, you know, teaching dads, you know, that having dads to teach the children and reach to the children is a good one. They've got dads that are doing projects down at Lightworks and building things and putting them into children's centres. There isn't a single biggest achievement, because I think that every move forward is an achievement, and it's a credit to Merrill and the staff that run that on our behalf. What else? There's lots in the pipeline. What I was going to suggest that at some point, I've already mentioned it to Merrill, is that we have a member briefing to brief the members. So like we've had tonight with the coroner, so something like that, just to bring you up to speed. So I'll get that arranged at some point in the near future. Councillor Clapham, you welcomed you that you were at the self-care, the integration 2020, along with Councillor Mrs Scott. Yes, it was mentioned at the end, and I did say that I would look at the issue that was raised about when people get better, then they fall off, and it's like what we're trying to do is work with adult social services and try and put that support around people and make sure they've got continued support, because the last thing we want is someone to get better and then become have a trip or a fall. So it's all that support that we can put in at a home level rather than having to be taken into care. You asked me what progress I've made, because I did say I would pick it up. Since that event, I've been quite busy organising an event for myself that's happening this weekend, but it hasn't fell off my agenda. I will be having a post-meeting to discuss all what went on with the Director of Public Health and the Chairman of the Clinical Commissioning Group, Roy Fisher. So we've already said we'll have a meeting after to discuss everything that was said. And you can record what I said there, is that we're going to collate all that information and share it out. It does link in. I'm just going to jump here with the Councillor Galley with the North and South health and wellbeing inquiries. This is all linking in. It links in to the event that Councillor Clapham and Councillor Scott was at, is the Integration 2000. It's all to do with the neighbourhood model, and it's how we bring the neighbourhoods in each particular wards together. And the Director of Public Health, in his closing remarks last week, said that this is not a top-down issue, it needs to be bottom-up. So there's a mirroring image, if you like. They were consulting with stakeholders and partners and the third sector, and they're also doing the consultation at with the neighbourhoods and the residents of the town. So those will come together, and we'll probably have some event later in the next 3-4 months where we can then share all that information, because things have to change, and it's unfortunate that we're having to look at an accountable care system now. So there's lots of challenges. You know, I wish we had more money, but central government obviously want to take more off us, so we have to look at different ways and means. So I'll be feeding that back in due course. Mrs. Callow, you mentioned regarding the inquiry. There's an independent inquiry ongoing. This has been overseen by the new chair of the Safeguarding Board, and I do know that progress is being made. However, I want to make sure that that is a thorough report, and once that is able to be published, we'll know that, we'll share that with you. It needs to be thorough, it is ongoing, and I am aware that there is dialogue with yourself and the Director of Adult Social Services. Councillor Williams, you asked me for the numbers. I'll give you the numbers. As of this morning, the number of looked after children was down from last week, and it currently stands at 531. In response to your other comments you've made, I'm not getting into a debate here because of the nature of the situation. There are legal complications. What I will say is that some of your statements were factually incorrect, and our condolences obviously go to the family and friends of that individual. But there is, there will be a standard inquiry, which will be a serious case review on that case in question. Councillor Gallagher, yeah, I've covered that one. I've covered everything there. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kane. We now move to item number 6, Council Tax Reduction Scheme 2018/19. Councillor Blackburn to move.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Delighted to move the recommendations set out at agenda item 6. The members will recall that the current council tax reduction scheme applies a flat rate of 27.11%, i.e. people who were previously in receipt of 100% council tax benefit currently have to pay 27.11% of their council tax. This decision, this item does two things. It disregards bereavement support payments, which are made to people when we calculate council tax liability, and disregards payments from certain charitable funds. So, for instance, the victims of terrorist attacks have received monies which were donated by members of the public and others. In the event that people are in receipt of those funds, that money will be disregarded when we calculate the council tax. But the main measure, Mr. Mayor, and again, thanks must go to Steve Thompson and his team for a lot of intricate work on this, is to reduce the burden for certain vulnerable groups, specifically where the applicant or their partner receives income support, income-based job seekers allowance or income-related employment support allowance. Now, instead of having to pay 27% of the council tax, they'll be asked to pay 13.5% of the council tax. This will cost around £400,000. This will be paid for both by the increased collection rates that we discussed before and the slight expansion of the council tax base, a decision on which I published the other day. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Questions? No? Seconder? Thank you.
Formally second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. We move then to item 7. Oh, I beg your pardon. I was just seeing if you were still awake, honestly. Vote to be taken. All in favour, please show. Any against? Any against? Unanimous, thank you. Item number 7. Mary Lake 2018/19. Councillor Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members will be familiar with the protocol, which states that this is not a time for big speeches. This is merely to make it clear who we intend to nominate as Mayor-elect for 2018-19. And at the risk of setting a trend, Mr Mayor, it gives me great pleasure to nominate Councillor Gary Coleman as Mayor-elect for 2018-19.
We need somebody with more experience.
Seconder?
I'll second that, Mr Mayor.
Well, that's very kind.
Excellent.
Thank you. Okay, Councillors, Humphreys, would you like?
I would gladly second that. I think it's a great idea.
Well, that's 2 seconds. That's more than I got. And I do have to say, if nobody had seconded it, I'd have done it. Congratulations, Councillor Coleman. Pardon?
That's a vote on it, Mr Mayor.
Shall we do that, shall we? All in favour? Any against? Congratulations, Councillor Coleman, son.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't take long because Councillor Ivan Taylor was at pains at our group meeting on Saturday to say we don't usually do long speeches. And when you hear that I will, all being well in May, be the 50th Mayor that Councillor Taylor will be a councillor with, it probably hits home why he says such a thing. I can't express how proud and honoured I am to hopefully in May be Mayor of Blackpool, to follow in the footsteps of William Henry Cocker, John Bickerstaff, and all the wonderful people that have been Mayor over the years, and all the wonderful people in this room that have been Mayor over the years. It really does fill me with great pride and honour. I was thinking that you can tell that my father and I have both been involved in the bus industry over the years, because you wait 141 years for a Coleman to be Mayor. And then another one follows right behind. You got there before me, sorry. May I thank you all for the unanimous vote this evening. I hope it's a sign that we'll have plenty more unanimous votes in the year leading up to the next council elections. Mr Mayor, if I can be half as good a mayor as you've been, then I'll be very happy.
You're only saying that because you mean it.
I know of no one I'd rather follow, Mr Mayor, and no greater role model. So, colleagues, Mr Mayor, Dad, thank you all for your support. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. On that last note, I stand with pride amongst people in this room who've given their respects to a wonderful gentleman who we've sadly lost in the last few weeks. We've said our thank yous to him. And now we end on a proud note for my family. We've gone from one to the other, and I think we've shown our respects to our friend Jimmy, and I think everything on that we can say has been said, but one thing I would like to add is I don't know of anyone in Blackpool